Hello, Brother Eric John Phillips, 24/7 World Radio. Welcome to the broadcast today with Brother George Widger. And we are here on August the 28th, 2023, on this Monday evening. So, Brother George, welcome to the broadcast.
Well, thank you, brother. It's always a pleasure to be on with you.
It's good to have you today. So, shall we get started and go ahead and take it away?
Okay, well, thank you. My scripture verse is John 3, verse 3, but I'll just start in verse 1 and maybe go a few verses beyond that. John 3, verse 1. There was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, the ruler of the Jews. The same came unto Jesus by night and said unto him, Rabbi, we know thou art a teacher come from God, for no man can do these miracles that thou doest, except God be with him. Verse 3. Jesus answered unto him and said, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Verse 4. Nicodemus, and he said unto him, How can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter the second time into his mother's womb and be born? Jesus answered, said, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born of water and of the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. That which is born of flesh is flesh, and that which is born of spirit is spirit. I'll stop there. I can go on. I could probably finish the entire chapter, but owing to time constraints. All right, so at least here in the United States, I know that during the 1960s and 70s, the expression being born again or being a born again Christian became popular. Now, people have used it before then, but it seemed as if that it became like a part of the vernacular. And so I guess what most people thought, well, have you been regenerated? Have you been born again? Have you been born from above? Have you experienced the new birth, the spiritual birth? And I'd imagine most people get this. Now, I don't mean to pick on a certain church or a certain denomination, but also, I'm not sure how long this has been going on, but definitely since at least the 1970s, the Catholic Church has started embracing evangelical lingo. For example, they don't necessarily have any qualms with the whole issue of being born again. They say, oh, yes, I was born again the day I got baptized. Also, this is a different point. They say, when you ask Catholics, so have you received Jesus as your Lord and Savior? Oh, yes, I have. I do it all the time at the Mass.
Well, yeah, because, of course, they don't read the Bible and they don't know doctrine. And, of course, all historic Protestant doctrine and Baptist doctrine is condemned as heresy, propagated by heretics such as you and me. So, of course, they're going to do the ecumenical game of seeking to conquer the historic Protestant churches and Baptist churches in submitting them and bringing them back to the control of the Jesuit papacy. So that's their game. It is a warfare. It is a war. And they'll do that and conquer the historic Protestant and Baptist churches by any means necessary. And so they'll adopt our method of speaking, our terminology, our doctrinal terms, but have completely different meanings for them.
And of course, as something we've discussed before, I don't have this memorized, but and by the way, the fourth vow or the extreme oath is a real thing. As a matter of fact, it was entered into the U.S. congressional record back in 1913, so over 100 years ago.
I have it from 6 different sources in my book. So absolutely, it is legitimate.
Okay, so basically, to paraphrase, one of the lines is, we're to be all Jesuits are to be all things, all men. To the Huguenots, a Huguenot. To a Lutheran, a Baptist, be a Baptist. It will even seek to teach from their pulpits. So they'll say, "Oh yes," you could. They'll say, "Oh yes, I've been regenerated," but you don't. But most people will just leave it at that. Okay, well, thank you. Well, have a good day. So this is the art of obfuscation and equivocation. Obfuscation means to deliberately confuse. Equivocation means to be deliberately vague or direct. For example, the classic example is, "Oh, honey, does this dress make me look fat?" Well, dear, there's just more of you to love. Okay, that's an
Yeah.
and well, so it's just like when people will just use words, just they'll use the same words, but they'll just give them different meanings. Oh, okay, so there are brothers.
That's what the Masonic Lodge does when they use the term born again. It sounds like our term, and it is, but they have a totally different meaning for it.
Oh, okay, so I suppose I can't make anybody happy because, as I said, I guess a few years ago, at the end of our streams, I'll give out my email and say if people have any questions, comments, concerns, or critique, please give me a line. Well, be careful what you ask for because you just might get that because probably at least once a week I'll get some sort of email, and it's usually positive. But somebody was saying recently, George, you spend way too much time talking about frivolous, trivial things like pop culture. Who cares about some obscure Johnny Cash song from the 1960s?
Well, the poor soul doesn't realize that the culture is a reflection of the working of Satan through his various and sundry agents, especially certain Freemasons like Johnny Cash, and they are imbibing a morality that is anti-Christ. And so the ones who listen to that kind of music get victimized and dumbed down and demoralized when they listen to it, which benefits Satan's mystery of iniquity, and the vast majority of believers are completely ignorant to the fact of how they're being manipulated. So you're doing the right things, George, and this poor man doesn't understand how he has been manipulated, as I was, as you were.
Okay. So speaking of pop culture and inane and vacuous topics, over the weekend, Bob Barker died. Robert William Barker, who was born on the 12th December 1923, died on August 26th, so on Saturday, so a couple days ago. He was 99, almost 100. So he is
So is that the Bob Barker of that TV program? What is it? It was a game show. Is that him?
Well, he did a couple of game shows, but he's probably best known, at least in the United States, for being the original host of The Price is Right.
Oh, The Price is Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that program he hosted a program from 1972 to 2007. Now, prior to that, he hosted a show from 1956 to 75, so they overlapped, called Truth or Consequences, which was just simply a trivia program. So, why do I bring him up? So, he was United States Navy, Naval Reserves. Okay, so no big deal there. But he got his undergrad degree from Drury University, which is in Springfield, Missouri, where he was a member of Sigma Nu. So that was his introduction to Freemasonry. So you may be wondering, and he was a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason.
So Bob Barker was a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason. That tells me why he was on the TV for all those years, and that he was approved by a high level certain Freemasons as they approved him, were approved by the high Jesuits that run Scottish Rite Freemasonry. So Bob Barker was a notorious Jesuit coadjutor, serving the order well through Freemasonry for his entire life.
Okay, so why do I bring him up and why do I talk about his career? Well, I've watched the program a few times over the years. So for those who are not familiar with the premise, particularly those who are listening out of the United States, they have contestants who would guess how much something costs, like a TV set, a car, washing machine. and you can go under the top price. So something costs $10,000, and you said it costs $9,000, but your opponent said $11,000. Even though you both tied in terms of how far you're away, you would win because you were below the target price. So you may be saying, well, what's the big deal about this? Well, no. Well, first, I guess the shows are usually half an hour or so. There's a complete waste of time.
Complete waste of time, and it teaches covetousness. I want to have that. I wonder how much it costs. A total waste of time. Yep.
Okay, so if you think about that, now I just mentioned Johnny Cash a moment ago. So I just found this. I just want to make a clarification. As I said, probably a couple years ago, his first wife was a Roman Catholic. His children
also tell us, George, he was another Scottish Rite Freemason.
And a Shriner Freemason.
And a Shriner, so he goes on to even higher. So Bob Barker and Johnny Cash are both white Scottish Rite Freemasons, busy serving the Jesuit order, running their American Masonic empire, started with no later than 1868 with the 14th Amendment. Go ahead.
Correct. So, anyway, so you're talking about trivia. So, and don't get me wrong, I know you weren't a big fan of Johnny Cash, just from a purely musical point of view. I like him, but you could say, you thought he was a little bit overrated, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I never thought he could sing. He was not a singer, and he was not really a musician. I mean, anybody can play 3 or 4 chords and sing a song like A Boy Named Sue to incite all the prisoners at Folsom Prison. I mean, anybody can be an agitator and write basic music and dress in black. And, he was no musician or artist as far as I'm concerned.
Well, it's interesting that the Jesuits are known as the Men in Black, and Johnny Cash was known as the Man in Black.
Sure.
Sure. Here was this, of course.
Yep. So anyway, all these entertainers, as you're pointing out, these first two are Freemasons, and we live in a Masonic empire that the Jesuits created after the war between the states with the 14th Amendment shoved down our throats by several radical red Republicans, including John Bingham, who wrote Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. And when he made citizenship national for the Jesuits, it was now off to the races to build their Masonic American empire, from sea to shining sea. And hence, with their entertainment and their sports, we see their high-level Freemasons throughout.
So we're talking about, okay, if I could just mention, at least one other thing in terms of, say, our item in terms of pop culture. I realize I might be alienating some of our younger audience members because I'm making reference to people who were popular 50, 60 years ago. So I do apologize for that.
No, don't apologize, because they have to learn American culture, George. They have to learn American culture. We just didn't wake up with iPhones and Michael Jackson and Prince. We have to go back to how we got there. And so that's an appreciation they need to develop.
Oh, okay. And I have to admit, I'm me, George, George Widger. I'm 54 years old. So I had to go with what I know. Granted, I'm a little bit younger than you are. So having said that.
You're a lot younger, George. Go ahead.
Well, I remember watching cartoons growing up, and I think I made reference to that. And one of my favorite cartoons, now, even though it had gone off the air before I was born, was the Rocky and Bullwinkle show. Now, I'm not sure how the Jesuits had control of that. It's probably Freemasonry. But one of the...
Of course, because Rockefeller is Rocky. And so it's high-level Freemasonry, promoting the lie of a war between the U.S. and Russia, because you have Boris Batonov, who is a Soviet spy. I mean, it was a wonderful mind game for children to imbibe them with the nonsense that the government in Washington was the enemy of the government in Moscow.
Well, thank you for the clarification, brother. Well, okay. So they had several other characters on the show and several different cartoons. They had Aesop's Fable, Sherman Peabody, and one of which was about a dim-witted Royal Canadian Mounted Trooper named Dudley Do-Right. For those who aren't familiar with Dudley, he is very handsome. He has blonde hair, blue eyes, and was obviously of Northern European descent. But as I said, he wasn't the brightest. He wasn't the brightest fellow in the world. So, in one 1961 episode, I don't have the date. He was dealing with a pyromaniac named Stokey the Bear. Now, for those who aren't familiar with Dudley Do-Right, his main nemesis was Snidely Whiplash. He had a war top hat, had a handlebar mustache, and was always just doing really dastardly things. Like
wasn't Dudley Do-Right in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police? Wasn't that?
Yes,
was
sir.
Okay? Thank you.
So his nemesis was Snidely Whiplash, who wore a black black top hat, and had a handlebar mustache, and was always engaging in all sorts of nefarious activities. One of which was in a 1961 episode where there was like a parody of Smokey the Bear, but in this parody it was Stokey the Bear. So what Stanley did is he hypnotized Stokey to start all sorts of fires all over Canada because kind
of like what's happening now and in the U.S. Yeah.
Well, there again, it's just.
Well, that's a coincidence, George. I forgot. It's a coincidence now. It's just these things just happen, George, and yeah, we can't draw any conclusions that there might be somebody involved that's doing this deliberately. Why, that would be conspiracy, and we can't talk about that, can we?
Okay, it's a ridiculous premise, but this Stokey the Bear acting on the behest of Snidely Whiplash because Stokey is hypnotized. So they're introducing the whole concept of MK Ultra mind control, although they don't say that directly. It's implied.
Yep.
So what he's doing now, they don't mention anything about direct energy weapons. He's just simply starting these conflagrations the old-fashioned way with matches. So he starts a bunch of fires all throughout Canada, and so Dudley's boss, the command, whatever his rank is, he said, "Dudley, we need you to find this pyromaniac." And our intelligence has it that he's down in Chicago, so try to look for him there.
Down in Chicago. Why would they say down in Chicago, George?
Because it's it's in the U.S. He has to go down to the U.S. So according to the Dudley Do-Right cartoon, Stokey the Bear caused a great Chicago fire of 1871. And they said, "Oh, we'll come up with this cover story." It was actually Mrs. O'Leary's cow that started the fire.
That's right. That's exactly what they said. Kicked over a bucket and started a fire. Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Just like Titanic accidentally hit an iceberg and went to the bottom of the ocean. It was a mistake. Yeah. Go ahead, George.
Okay, as I said, this was an obscure children cartoon from over 6 years ago. How much truth do you think they're telling us in that?
Probably a whole lot. I mean, listen, these guys make these cartoons for the purpose of communicating what they're going to do or what they have done, and it's entertaining to them. They like it, and they like doing it in the face of an uninformed, illiterate culture that is irresponsible and could never possibly believe or conceive of the fact that they're being manipulated by this propaganda through cartoons.
And among other things. Now, as I said, Dudley Do-Right, as I said, he has blonde hair, blue eyes.
Do you remember the theme, George? Remember the theme? You remember that theme?
I do.
Okay. I just want to know if I sang it properly for you now.
So I just wanting. So forgive me for stating the obvious. We talked about his physical features. Well, I realize those are just a pure coincidence. He looks of European. He appears to be of European descent.
Well, he should. The ones who populate Canada are white, apart from the Indians. Vast majority of the population's white up there, so it's a white nation. So he ought to be depicted with white people.
Oh, except for the, however, something we've discussed before. I understand they've come out with a new version of Little Mermaid, where the Little Mermaid is now black.
Yes, of course. I find that funny because the vast majority of blacks don't like to swim. They're not swimmers. There are some who are, but the vast majority are not. They don't like it. But we'll make a black mermaid anyway. Go ahead. Kind of like white men can't jump with Wesley Snipes, black men can't swim. It's kind of the same thing, but we can't say that because that would be racism and prejudice, wouldn't it? Not actually a truth within the various races. Indeed, white men cannot jump like blacks. Absolutely correct. I'm not offended by the statement. But black men can't swim like whites. That's true too. But we're supposed to be ashamed of that and sorry that we're white and never say any generalizations like that are true, lest we be accused of being racist and prejudiced. Go ahead, George.
Well, thank you for giving me my segue for my next point. I guess over the weekend, I guess also on Saturday the 26th, there's a shooting at a Dollar General store in Jacksonville, Florida. The purported shooter was named Pelmeter. Yes, Brian Christopher Pelmeter. He lived from the 28th of November 2001, died on August the 26th, 2023. Now, he supposedly shot himself, having killed 3 black men at the store. Now, you and I were talking about this prior to coming on, and you said, well, that's down in Florida, and you live in Pennsylvania, I live in California. Why should you care about that? Well, there's at least a couple reasons. One, of course, they're going to use this as a pretext.
Well, I want to add something here, George. Okay, we're going to put it in the national press that some white savage killed 3 black men in a store. And I don't know what was going on. I don't know if they were stealing anything. I mean, who knows? But why aren't they reporting at least 10 black on white murders yesterday or today? Because that's the average. These majority savage blacks kill 10 white people every day in this country on the average. Now, where is that being reported? And they're doing it with guns. Where is that being reported? Why, that's not being reported because it has to be under the illusion that only white men are killing black men with guns. And therefore, we have to take the guns from all white men. That's their mind game. That's their psyop. So I don't really care what it has to say. When they want to start reporting black on white murder, well, then I might be a little more concerned. But until such time, it's a psyop. It happened in Florida. It didn't happen in Pennsylvania. And so I'm really not concerned. Florida is a sovereign nation. Pennsylvania is a sovereign nation. They need to punish that crime like they would punish anything else. But they can't, because if they punish that crime, why, they'll be racist and prejudiced because, well, no, for the whites, they can really get rid of him. But if any blacks that commit that kind of crime, well, that's racism and prejudice. And he didn't have a father, and he was raised in the slum, and every other kind of excuse to justify his murder. And it makes me sick. I've watched it for 50 years.
Well, you see, the thing is, okay, there are at least a couple reasons why somebody who doesn't live in Florida should be concerned about this. One, it can be used as a pretext for federal anti-Second Amendment laws, or it could say, hey, you know what, Gavin Newsom here in California or Kathy Hochul in Florida said, hey, we don't want what just happened in Jacksonville to happen here. Therefore,
yeah. Why don't you start punishing crime, Gavin? Why don't you start hanging murderers, Gavin? Why don't we start hanging those involved with crime with guns that murder other people or threaten to kill somebody with a gun? I say anybody pulls a gun on a cop, he's dead. Hang him. Now, when you start getting rid of these savages, majority of them black and majority of them Roman Catholics and Italians and Irish, not to mention the few white Protestants maybe and the few Jews, when you start killing these people and you start hanging them, all the gun crime is going to go away because it's committed by a bunch of people that continue to have the recidivism and over again. And that's not going to happen when you punish crime, which is the purpose of government.
Amen. Okay, so, but we're assuming this event even took place. Now,
Right.
I'm not saying
You know,
one
it
way.
really, that's right. How do you know what were the real characteristics behind it? What really happened? What was going on? Well, it's going to be reported. White man shoots 3 black men, innocent poor little black men in a store. Now, they might have been innocent. They might have been well-groomed. They might have been Christian men. It might have been just out and out murdered, like that white savage killed those black Protestants several years ago, killed, what, 11 blacks. So, you know, who knows the details? I'm not really concerned. That concern is for Florida, and they should prosecute, and if he's guilty of murder, hang him. And it's the same way in every other state until Biden and the federal government. You have no business interfering with gun rights. So stay out of it.
Amen. Well, you see, well, that's academic.
Before, George, any government that wants to take the guns from the people wants to kill those people. I taught that in my private citizenship class today. So, no, you want to take my guns, I must conclude you want to kill me, and therefore I must react accordingly.
Amen. So something you've been saying for years on this broadcast and I guess other formats is since no later than March the 9th, 1933, no later than that date, all the people living in the United States are enemy belligerents.
That's right.
Therefore, since we're their
enemy belligerents and they're property of the commander-in-chief. He has legal title to all U.S. citizens, enemy belligerents. That's right.
So forgive me for being a little slow on the update here. So that means if we're their enemy, that means they're our enemy.
That's right. However, when I teach you in my private citizenship class to be restored to a former status, you're no longer the enemy of the military government, and the military government has the obligation to protect you while they're waging war on all the other enemy belligerent U.S. citizens in this country. And that's pursuant to Article 23H of the Hague Convention of 1907. But if you're an enemy belligerent, they have every right to wage war on you. They're waging war on you from District of Columbia, Commander-in-Chief using his military, and every other thing he possibly can, including the legal profession and the medical profession and the academia, to make war on all the enemy belligerents for extermination for the purpose of destroying historic white Protestant Western civilization, pursuant to the Jesuit Order's Council of Trent.
Sorry for.
Do we have a cheering section in the back there, George?
Well, yes, but this is of the 2-legged variety. That was my my grandniece. Anyhow, so forgive me for belaboring this point. So that means this government can start an earthquake, burn you out of your house, your business. They can flood you out. They can.
That's right. It's exactly right. By any means necessary. Complete Machiavelli doctrine. Complete Jesuitical destruction of a culture by any means necessary. And so they'll use all their high technology to do it. Their Jesuit jab for bogus coronavirus to do it with their Jesuit Fauci. Anything they can continue to do, and they continue to do it because it's a military warfare against enemy belligerents spearheaded by the commander-in-chief, overseen by the Jesuits of Georgetown University. That's how this empire really works.
Okay, so I just mentioned at the beginning of the stream, I talked about the death of Bob Barker over the weekend. So, as I said, he had a naval background, so almost certainly had there's an excellent chance he had an intelligence background. He was a Freemason. So they said, his handlers probably said, "Hey, Bob, you best can serve us as like a game show host."
And by the way, they made him a multi-millionaire. So he has plenty of money, and he's not concerned about his daily bills like you and I are. Go ahead.
Okay, so he was a soldier for the machine.
That's right.
So, but however, rather than killing people with bullets and bombs, he would just simply kill them intellectually.
That's right. Intimidation. That's right. Overawe, all that stuff. And of course, he was trained in martial arts pretty much also.
I'm sorry, are you talking about Bob Barker?
Bob Barker, that's right. He was a karate master.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yep.
So now, for those who like our banter, who like this, the chit chat about popular culture, about Johnny Cash or Bob Barker, you might want to either tune out for the next few minutes, or if you're watching this later on YouTube, you might want to fast forward this part, because I need to talk about some boring history stuff.
History is never boring once you make it relevant. The academia in this country has done a wonderful job to make it irrelevant, so everybody's bored with it and doesn't want to hear it. But I guarantee when you make it relevant to any topic, it's an eye-opener, it's thrilling, and it's exciting.
Okay, so I know for the last few weeks, we've talked extensively about Hawaii and Maui, what's going on there, and all the skullduggery that was taking place. Well, ever since Hawaii actually became a U.S. possession. Now, as I said before, Hawaii officially became a state on August the 21st, 1959, so just over 64 years ago. However, it officially became a U.S. territory in 1898, so 125 years ago. Prior to that, there was, now we in the mainland talk about December the 7th being the day of infamy. And I know we've talked at great lengths about that. But for the Native Hawaiians, their day of infamy is January the 17th, 1893, in which, because it was on that date, the U.S. government, with the backing of the Marines, overthrew the Kingdom of Hawaii.
With the backing of what now? With the backing of?
It's with the Marines.
Oh, the Marines. Oh, okay.
Okay.
They're building their empire from sea to shining sea, pursuant to that lesbian woman who wrote the song America.
Okay.
So I remember when I had a meeting in Ohio, I believe, and during a point in the meeting, I advocated that Hawaii declare its independence and revert back to the kingdom. And there was a guy from Hawaii there. He was real Hawaiian, and he said, "You, being an Anglo, advocate the restoration of Hawaii, the Hawaiian kingdom?" I said, "Of course." He said, "I don't believe it." I said, "I teach the same thing with Puerto Rico." Yeah. So no, let's end this empire, give these possessions back to the natives who owned it, and teach them to whatever arts they need if they want to be taught. In the meantime, leave them alone. And so you can't have an empire. Remember, empire builders are bloody murderers, and the Jesuits are the great empire builders. And so if the Hawaiians would know that the Jesuits were in control of the government at that time, then maybe they would kick the Jesuits out of Hawaii, just like the wonderful guy in Nicaragua kicked the Jesuits out of Nicaragua a couple of days ago.
Are you talking about Daniel Ortega?
Daniel Ortega. He calls him a terrorist organization. He kicked the Jesuits out of Nicaragua. Praise God. He's the first guy with any guts that I've seen in the last 20, 30 years, and he happens to be Hispanic and a Roman Catholic. But good for him.
Okay. So do you mind if I address that in just a moment? I need to stick with Hawaii. Now, on January the 17th, 1893, so 130 years ago, there was a revolution in which the United States government, backed by the Marines, overthrew the Queen of Hawaii, and her name was, probably going to butcher this, Lil Au Kahani.
Who was the president at the time, George?
McKinley, if I'm not mistaken.
93. McKinley was assassinated in 1901. I think it's the president before him. Was that Grover Cleveland?
Benjamin Harrison, I'm sorry.
Benjamin Harrison? You sure? Benjamin Harrison. Who was the president in 1893?
Okay, it wasn't Grover. Okay, it wasn't Grover Cleveland. Boy, okay, it wasn't McKinley. I should know this.
Whoever it was some Jesuit coadjutor working for the order in absorbing Hawaii after they had absorbed Alaska in 1959. They made it a state, make Hawaii a state in 1959 also. But yeah, the Seward's folly in getting Alaska, that was building the empire for 14th Amendment America.
Yes, it was. So anyhow, the group that orchestrated this was known as the Committee of 13, led by John Stevens, who was the official U.S. minister to Hawaii. He wasn't.
George, your cheerleader's going on here now. Go ahead.
Okay. So it was a secret society called the Committee of 13 that orchestrated this revolution. So this, as I said, this is in 1893, so almost half a century before Pearl Harbor. So that brings up a couple of points. They're setting, people don't realize what the Jesuits were setting into motion here with the annexation of Hawaii, which, as I said, from 1846 to 1893 was a kingdom. It was a sovereign nation with its own constitution. It had diplomatic relations with several countries. They had ambassadors.
Yep.
So that was, however, the Vatican, that seemed to be immaterial.
That's right. But remember, 1893, the Vatican, with its radical Yankee army, was busy subjugating what was left of the American Indian nations, and that will end in 1895 with Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. So while they're busy subjugating the Native American Indians here and the tribes, they also decide to subjugate Hawaii, because that'll be part of the empire ultimately, from sea to shining sea. Yeah.
Okay, so well, construction of Pearl Harbor base began in 1900, so more than just over 40 years before the actual attack. So you had to wonder about some things, and this is pure speculation. Now, according to what we've been taught, the Wrights brothers, Orville and Wilbur Wright, would invent the airplane in 1903 in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, December the 17th.
George, are you walking around while we're having our interview? Because if you are, I would like you just to kind of sit and be concentrated, if you would, please.
Okay. Well, actually, I actually have. Okay.
You have what, George?
My
your grandniece?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Anyhow, so you had the overthrow of the Hawaiian government in 1893. So a decade before the aircraft would be officially invented. So I'd imagine the Jesuits knew this technology was either going to be invented soon, or it was already in existence, and the general public just simply didn't know that.
Are you talking about aircraft technology?
I am.
Okay.
So this is speculation because there are two major elements in order to pull off Pearl Harbor. You need the plane, and you need aircraft carriers.
No. That's right.
So now, even though most people, Hawaii is a beautiful place. It is a popular tourist destination. It's a popular place for people to have their honeymoon. Its primary purpose, at least as far as the United States is concerned, is the strategic value. It's roughly halfway between the West Coast and the Far East, because not only would it be used in the final phase of the Second 30 Years' War, i.e. World War II, it would be used in Korea, Vietnam, and to a lesser extent, the Afghan.
It's a wonderful springboard into the Far East to wage war on the Asian nations, to kill off their best manhood, and then to reduce their governments to servitude to Washington or Beijing, Peking, which is controlled by Washington, so that they can reduce all those nations ultimately to China under the kings of the East. And so the Jesuits knew that Hawaii would be a perfect staging base for the American military, the American Navy, to launch into the Far East. Sure.
Now, for what it's worth, somebody sent me recently, I believe it was a BBC documentary about the history of Hawaii. Hawaii, roughly 18% of its financial economy is made up on defense, because of people who work at places like Pearl Harbor, civilian employees, or people who have businesses off base, like restaurants and hotels and so forth. So that would be so you have all the branches represented there. You have the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard. Not just at Pearl Harbor, but you have Hickam Base, which used to be called Hickam Field. You also have Schofield.
Hickam Field is now Hickam Base?
Correct.
Okay.
Hickam Air Force Base.
Okay.
So And of course, and as I said, you have tourists and things like that, So you could say Hawaii and both Alaska came part of the United States because of their strategic value.
That's right.
So would you concur with that?
Absolutely, of course. You got the radical red Republican Seward. It was called Seward's Folly. And so we're going to bring Alaska in and make it part of the United States because that shows you that they're making an empire, building an empire for the purpose of destroying, using the Anglo-American white power structure that was solidified in 1871, using it to wage war around the world for the benefit of the papacy to reduce nations that were not subject to the temporal power of the Pope, like Orthodox Russia. So we're going to purchase Alaska from Russia for what was it, $15 million, something like that. But we're not doing it for anything nice or decent. We're building a military empire.
Okay, so now, as I said, both Hawaii and Alaska became states in 1959. I don't remember the admission date for Alaska, but I'd just like to talk a little bit about the Aloha state. So I understand that another fire broke out in Maui on Saturday, and you had
Sounds like another coincidence to me, George.
Yes,
that's just terrible. Those things happen,
Well, yes, and now for what it's worth, the town that got destroyed there, Lahaina, was the original capital of Hawaii. And
all the more reason to destroy it. That way they can never revert back to the Hawaiian kingdom. So all the more reason to destroy it, but make sure that one Roman Catholic church survives and everything else is burned down.
Well, yes, it was obviously a miracle of the Rosary.
Oh, a miracle of the Rosary. Kind of like the Jesuits at Hiroshima.
Or,
miracle of the Virgin Mary. Oh.
Or St. Now, I made reference to the Chicago fire back in October 1871. All of downtown Chicago was destroyed except for two Catholic churches, one of which was St. Michael's Jesuit Church.
St. Michael's Jesuit Church. There's a St. Michael's Jesuit Church in Bavaria. Also.
So you had to wonder, was Mrs. O'Leary's cow actually a Jesuit priest in disguise?
Was who a Jesuit priest in disguise? Jesuit.
Mrs. O'Leary's cow.
Well, I'm sure that was a nice concocted story because they always have a cover story that they put up. But and I tend to think that probably some of the Southerners that were raging over the destruction of Atlanta and Richmond and partially New Orleans and a few other places in the South, Savannah, it wouldn't surprise me if certain raging white Southerners would go up and burn Chicago down. If you want to do that to our southern cities, we're going to do that to your northern cities. And that's 1871, just 6 years after the end of the war.
Okay, that's possible, but maybe they're covering something up. Maybe they're covering something up in Maui. I don't know. Now, for what it's worth, I know this is completely a far field, but we've talked several times about the firebombing of Dresden, and not just Dresden, but dozens of German Protestant cities.
Dozens of Japanese cities, too.
Yes.
Good old 33rd degree Freemason Curtis LeMay oversaw the bombing of all those Japanese towns in Japan and would be part of the airborne nuclear war hoax and also would participate in the Kennedy assassination in 1963. So Curtis LeMay was a dirty, filthy, cigar-smoking, 33rd degree Freemason that was building an empire for the Jesuit order. And the very memory of that wicked sinner is upsetting, to say the least.
Oh, okay. So anyhow, so one of the things that happened at Dresden is, now we've talked about the composer Johann Sebastian Bach, but during his day, there were a number of other composers. I don't have their dates in front of me, or contemporaries of him, who are far better known than he was. two of whom were Heinrich Bieber and Heinrich Schütz. They were probably just about as prolific as jazz Bach, but almost all their writings have disappeared. It just so happens almost all their manuscripts were destroyed at Dresden. Now, we do
because
know
Dresden was a Protestant Lutheran city, and it had all the wonderful archives of the Protestant Prussian culture, its libraries, its Luther Bibles, its the works of Luther, all these other things that were there in Dresden. So we must firebomb Dresden in the destruction of the Reformation out of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Lutheran Germany, as well as those beautiful white Saxon people that are the most intelligent of all the white races, and whatever they touch and build and design is usually supreme. So we got to get rid of them too.
Okay, so anyhow, so people, I mean, some of the writings, Schütz, Bieber, and so forth, not to be confused with Justin Bieber, they did survive. But actually, almost all the manuscripts for their compositions survived in the United States at Lutheran churches in places like Minnesota and Wisconsin.
Yes.
Because you had German Lutherans who came to the United States who brought their writings. But
yep, and the great American historian on the Lutheran Church in America is Nicholas Lenker. So for the listeners, you need to get Lenker's works on Luther. And in volume 1, you will see that Luther anticipated a restoration of the nation of Israel, and therefore that's another reason he never wrote on the Jews and their lies. So thank God for Mr. Lenker, the American historian for the Lutheran Church here in America.
Okay, so do you mind if I mention something completely trivial and immaterial that has absolutely nothing to do with what we're talking about?
Well, it's really not immaterial, so go ahead, George.
Well, okay, you've been warned. Somebody sent me a video recently, and I've seen there's a young lady named Felicia. She's from Germany originally, and so she talks about, she's moved to the United States, so she talks about German culture, the German language, and things like, German food, and the differences between Germany and, say, the United States and other places. But she also talked about the history of German immigrants in the United States. In places like Wisconsin, Minnesota, the Dakotas, Pennsylvania. And however, there's one group that almost gets completely ignored, are the Texan German.
That's right. I had an advisor whose name was Walt, and he goes back to the Germans of Texas. Yeah.
Okay, so they've been basically disappeared from history for a number of reasons, and you'll find out why. Well, there's a revolution in 1848. Sure, the Jesuits were somehow involved with it. So you had thousands of Germans who came to the United States, and for whatever reason, they settled in the hill country of Texas between San Antonio and Austin, or as the Germans say, Austin. And they established some new towns like Friedrichsburg, New Braunfels, and places like that. And they're almost
where those white people go, where those white Protestants go, they establish civilization. They establish culture. They create towns and cities and the arts and sciences. That's what these white people do. The black people don't do that. The Hispanics don't do that. And the Asians don't do that. That's what white people do. That is history, particularly white Protestants, more so than white Roman Catholics. Go ahead, brother.
Okay, so people might say, well, what's Texas German? Is it where they go around saying, "Wie geht's, y'all?" Like, how you doing, y'all? Well, or ich mach schnell, right quick. Joke. Okay. So they established these communities in Texas and the Hill Country, and they established their culture. So they had compositions, they had dances, they had music festivals, they had German food. Not so many. They didn't have the Oktoberfest is more of a Bavarian tradition.
Correct.
Not really.
That's right.
Not really. So they had bookshops. They had all sorts of arts, and I want to address that if I could. So, however, their culture flourished for 50, 60 years, but then you had this thing called World War I came along, and Deutsch became verboten,
Yeah.
forbidden.
So these criminals in Washington, these Jesuits who are running this war, are going to outlaw speaking German during World War I and World War II. I know World War I because I know some Mennonites that speak Pennsylvania Dutch. They told me they outlawed German in town here. So I'd have told those sinners, you have no reason to outlaw my language, and I'm going to continue to speak it. And that's just another reason to declare independence and get rid of the Jesuits running D.C.
Well, you see,
So,
is it? No, I mentioned the overthrow of 1893. Well, a similar thing happened in Hawaii. Now, granted, there weren't that many Germans there. Basically, the Hawaiian language got outlawed. They said the Hawaiians had to learn English, so they had to.
they did the same thing with the Indians. They outlawed their native languages and made them learn English. And no Protestant or Baptist that believes the Bible does that. You simply evangelize them, give them the gospel, and they continue in their culture with their native language and their history, and let them go. Let them be autonomous and have their own churches. But to force them to learn English or any other language that's not their native language is a sin and a crime against God.
Okay, so these people, these ethnic Germans who settled in Texas and places like around San Antonio, Austin, had their own German churches, Lutheran churches, and they had their own German culture. But that has been basically disappearing for a number of reasons. Since they don't speak German for the most part, they don't speak German anymore, and except for the 80 plus crowd who are dying quickly, and so that is how that is one of the ways, this is my humble opinion, how the Reformation is being stamped out.
And remember too, now the Germans, the Lutherans, when they came here to Texas, and they were holding to the Luther Bible. Now, when you hold to the Luther Bible, the Lord blesses you. But when you depart for these heretical Bibles of Westcott and Hort, Greek text, or Lockman, Tregelles, and Tischendorf, and all those higher criticism rationalists, when you depart to their Bibles, which are Pro-Jerome's Latin Vulgate, your culture falls apart. And that's what happened to the Lutherans in Germany, the Lutherans here in America, the Lutherans in Texas. They departed from that supernatural book, the translation of the Textus Receptus and Masoretic text into the German language is done by Luther.
And I believe you had somebody on a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, the fellow from South Africa, Simon. What was it?
Simon Roche.
Roche. I've only heard him once, but it was a fascinating broadcast. I think if people have not heard it, I suggest they listen to it. So he was talking about the history of South Africa and how there are obvious differences, but how incredibly similar it was to, the United States. There are obvious differences, but in terms of the people who settled what we now call South Africa originally.
Yeah, they were white Protestants, and there were no blacks in the area. They didn't take the land from the blacks. That's more Jesuit, anti-white, black communist propaganda. And he proves it. Those are historical facts.
And
so difficult things when you're in the midst of propaganda advocating the destruction of the white race in South Africa.
Oh, okay. So, you're talking earlier, or we were talking earlier about that shooting in Jacksonville, Florida. They said the alleged gunman, what was his name? Amateur or whatever it was. They said, well, first the police, I guess, killed him, so they say. But we actually, and so when you look up Wikipedia and they talk about motive of the crime, it says anti-black racism. Okay.
Now, do they report that when these black savages kill white people? Do they say anti-white racism? Is a black man capable of racism in the press? I don't see it anywhere. Okay. Now, if this white guy killed these 3 black guys and they were innocent, they were about their business, well, then he deserves to be killed by the cops. But what about all these black, majority savage blacks that are killing white people every day, and the news doesn't even tell you that the killer was black, or that he's a racist, or that he's tattooed from head to foot, or that he's got these things in his lips and his earlobes, looking like a savage Watusi? How about that? We're never told about that, are we? We can't have that description. Well, that would be racist and prejudice.
Okay, so but here's the question: how do they? Okay, if the police killed him, how do they know? Okay, assuming this actually happened, assuming he was the actual perpetrator, how do they know his motive was anti-black racism?
Right? How do they know? That's right. Maybe
Because
those blacks decided to try to kill him. Maybe like those 3 savage blacks in New York, where they were going to attack Getz, and Getz pulled a gun and shot all 3 of them, killed a couple of them. They're going to send him to jail for 2 or 3 years for carrying without a permit, and yet he saved his life from those 3 black savages. See, that's not being reported in the news because you can't tell that truth. Isn't that right, Stephen A. Smith? Yeah, go ahead.
well, what's the cliche? Well, it's better to be judged by a dozen than carried by half a dozen.
That's right. And the first time I heard that, a black woman said that to me. I'd rather be tried by 12 than carried by 6. They were interviewing her in Chicago. Some white newsman interviewed her and said, well, what happens if they outlaw guns here in Chicago? And she was very nice. She was carrying a 44. She said, well, I don't think I'd obey it. She was really nice. And she said, I'd rather be tried by 12 than carried by 6. And I thought, that's great. Good for you, dear. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, so anyhow, I know we've been going on for an hour, and I try to stay on topic, and I usually do that for about 30 seconds or so. But there's something I need to say that I understand that since July, there's been fires raging in Louisiana. Something like 50,000 acres have been destroyed there.
Yeah.
The governor there is a devout Roman Catholic, John Bell Edwards. And I'm not sure.
It's all the southern states. What, Louisiana?
Also, there have been fires in
that makes all those southern states: Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California. All Roman Catholic governors. Wonderful. Think they'd ever tell the truth? I don't think so, unless they want to end up like Hale Boggs. But go ahead.
Okay, so these wires and these fires aren't just a West Coast phenomenon. They've been very bad recently, and obviously in Hawaii, in California, Oregon, Washington State, and as well as British Columbia, Canada.
Yeah.
So,
in preparation for the Chinese invasion of the West Coast. Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Okay, so now it's interesting. Something you mentioned the church in the Catholic Church in Lahaina that survived. But there's all sorts of questions, improbable events that took place a couple weeks ago when the fire started, such as the chief of police of Maui is John Pelliger. Now he was a police captain in Las Vegas. He was also in charge of the cleanup after the Mandalay Bay shooting back in October 2017. And
I think he's a good Roman Catholic too.
Well, I'm not sure. I haven't been able to find out what his religious affiliation is, but I do.
We can't have that up front. We gotta hide that. Yeah.
Okay, but I do know that he was trained in the FBI Academy.
Well, then the Jesuits running the FBI Academy. Well, then I'm sure they know all about him.
So now for what it's worth, if I could just mention something purely trivial. I understand that Maui had, until last year, Maui had a policy that in order to be chief of police, you had to be a Maui resident for at least a year. They changed that rule last year. And so...
In preparation for what they did a few weeks ago. Why, yes, sure. All warfare. Go ahead.
Okay, so he was given, I guess... military was vested into, I guess, the Nevada state retirement, and he was able to retire with full pension. And I guess he's going to be able, I'm not sure how long he'll have to work in 5 or 10 years in order to invest there. But he's going to have a cushy retirement, to say the least. Now, for what it's worth, I have this from several sources that he was given a $50,000 bonus to relocate from Las Vegas to Maui.
Yeah.
And you'd be wondering, well, who really cares? Well, okay, even though there are 3, maybe 4 other people who are probably just as qualified in the Maui to do his position.
Right. And natives of it. A native has an allegiance to his country, not some foreigner like this guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's just like so he's given a $50,000 bonus relocation fee. You know, of course, he had to sell his house in Vegas and take his children and move them to Hawaii and buy a new house. Okay, I can understand that could be a bit of a logistical problem, but they took care of everything for him.
They moved him. He didn't move a thing. They moved all of his furniture, moved all for him, gave him 50 grand. It wasn't a strain on him at all. It's a military operation.
So, but here's another factor. So after being on the job for less than 2 months, he demanded a 23% pay increase. So he actually got a 29% pay increase. So his base salary is probably at least $200,000. Now, Maui has a population of something like 170,000 people, not even, so less than 200,000 people. So, and you're not talking about
everybody can give him $1 and he'll be happy, right?
So you're out, brother Eric, you're obviously in the wrong line of work. You should be the chief of police in Maui.
That's exactly right. What's my problem? Then I can cover it all up and keep the people off the crime scene, and so they don't discover things that are going to go in the press, and just keep it all covered up. Just like Titanic or any other things the Jesuits have done. So they just keep doing it, and nobody gets prosecuted, nobody goes to jail, because the Jesuits run the Justice Department. And they have their cover-up artists right on the scene to cover it all up, like they did with the Kennedy assassination and other places. So this is just typical modus operandi of the Jesuit order in Maui. And maybe someday the American peoples, the white peoples particularly, might wake up and see that they're under attack. Maybe the Hawaiian people might wake up and see they're under attack by the Vatican and the Jesuits. I wonder. Maybe not.
Well, okay.
We're over an hour here, so we're going to have to end this shortly. Want to have a few more comments, and then we got to go.
Okay, so I've seen a number of videos about what happened in Lahaina. Now, as I said, it was the original capital of Honolulu. So, and at least 200 or 300 businesses were destroyed. Now, Lahaina has a population of about maybe 4,000 people. So, and they probably won't rebuild. So that was another purpose for this operation. In just my humble opinion. Now,
the big cartel capitalists are moving in. They're going to buy the land. I think Oprah is busy buying land.
Yes.
That flat coadjutor for the white power structure that she serves. Yeah, but go ahead.
Okay, so if you look at what happened in Lahaina, probably dozens of scores of people died unnecessarily. There's only one major artery out of Lahaina. It's called Front Street. And the police said, oh, there was some construction going on, or there was a down power line or something. So that is why we had to block the road.
My, how convenient. How convenient. Or another coincidence, construction on the road so that people can't evacuate. That's very convenient.
So the police there, I'm not saying we're at minimum incompetent. They're just simply following orders. Now, this is just my opinion. Have you noticed that over the last, say, 2-3 years with all these so-called vaccine mandates across the country, Chicago, New York, the state of California, that was part of the winnowing out process. Those who took the jab that was part of a test to see who's really on the team.
Yep. And they won't be on the team long because they're going to disappear in about 5 years. And it'll look like natural causes. We can never trace it to the Jesuit jab. And nobody's going to talk about it. And Jesuits are going to get away scot-free, as they always do. Nobody's going to get prosecuted. And we'll just go on to the next attack on the enemy belligerents.
Okay, so well, this is another topic altogether, which I'll have to probably elaborate the next time we're on. Okay, so if I could just say something I need to talk about the next time we're on is I got a request to talk about George Harrison, one of the Beatles. I guess in the 1970s he had an audience with John Paul VI.
Yeah. Well, that's nice.
I'm sorry. Paul VI. Paul VI.
Paul VI. The Kennedy assassin. When was that? 1970 when?
Well, I don't have the date. I haven't. There was an article from the Washington Post. Yes, that Washington Post that talks about the meeting between George Harrison and Paul VI.
Okay, Paul VI oversaw Montini. He oversaw the assassination of Kennedy. That's correct.
Mm-hmm. And he also was one of the overseers of Paperclip.
It's bringing in all the Nazis here after World War II. Very good. So they can build their anti-gravity craft. Very good.
And of course, one of his Montini's protege was a young Karol Wojtyla, the future John Paul II.
That's right. Very good. That's wonderful. Yep.
Okay, so
well, anyway, we got to go. So I trust the listeners have enjoyed our dialogue. Please give us your contact information and please stay on until I sign off. Okay.
All right. So if people have any questions, comments, concerns, critiques, there's a topic they'd like me to cover or go over again, please email me. And if I don't get to you right away, please try again in 24 hours. I'm a one-man operation here. Oh, my email is georgewidger1969@gmail.com, GEORWIDGER1969@gmail.com. If they didn't get that from me, they can get it from you, brother.
Amen. Well, George, I want to thank you for being with us today, and I trust the listeners will enjoy the broadcast and be informed of the many interesting facts that you brought forth and a little bit of my rantings. So thank you for being with us today. The Lord bless, and thank you, listeners, for being with us today. You may go to my website, VaticanAssassins.org. Make sure you purchase a copy of my book, Vatican Assassins, in CD form. There's other things there that may be of interest. And go to 24/7 World Radio. You can purchase my broadcast for the last several years there, among other things. Please take my private citizenship class. It's becoming more and more relevant as we are approaching martial law. And so until the next time we meet, may the Lord bless you as you do his will according to his word. King James AV 1611 Bible. Maranatha.